Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Center for Brooklyn History. Thank you so much for being here tonight on this cold February night. My name is Marcia Eli. I work here at the center with my colleagues, along with those at the Brooklyn Public Library and the Arts and Culture team to bring you these free weekly public programs. Tonight, we continue the series Just Conversations, co-presented by the Center for Brooklyn History and Brooklyn.org. Just Conversations brings into dialogue injustices in our borough, city, and society, and gives voice to those who are galvanizing change. Our topic this evening, reparations for slavery and what is happening in New York State. Before getting into the program more, I want to share a few things that relate here at CBH. First, I urge you to explore our new exhibition, which is called Traces, Family History, Research, and the Legacy of Slavery in Brooklyn. It examines the history of slavery in Brooklyn through artwork, historical records, and by highlighting the important work of Black genealogy researchers. Every Friday, there's a free tour at 3. Once a month, there's a free tour at 2 on Saturdays. It's well worth coming for the tour, and I really hope that you explore that exhibition, which so relates to this topic tonight. I also want to encourage you to join us for some of our upcoming programs. Next month, we welcome Nicole Hannah-Jones, who will lead a conversation with historian Martha Jones about her new memoir, The Trouble of Color. Then journalist Ellie Mistal will be here with political scientist Christina Greer on March 27th. And historian Jane Theoharis will talk about her new book, King of the North, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Life of Struggle Outside the South, with scholar Eddie Glaude in April. I really hope that you'll come back to some or all of these conversations. I want to thank our guests tonight. Truly, we are so honored and privileged to have you here. Assemblywoman Solage is running a little late, but when she gets here, she's going to join on stage, and it may be before actually we get into the meat of the conversation. But Dr. Derek Hamilton is here, and I am so honored and can't wait really to hear his personal insights and perspectives on this topic that hovers over our history like a cloud. You're going to hear more about them from and really why what they have to say matters from our moderator, Aria Florent, in a moment. But first, just a few matters of business. You were invited to take an index card when you came in and a pencil. We're going to collect those cards with your questions throughout the evening, so you don't have to wait. If you have a question, we will come up and down the aisle and write it down, and we'll collect your card and bring them up to Aria, and that's how we're going to do the audience Q&A. Now, it is my great pleasure to invite Brooklyn.org's CEO and President, Jocelyn Rainey, to say a few words. Thank you.
So thank you, Marcia. And thank you to the entire Center for Brooklyn History team. We are so deeply grateful and honored to be in partnership with you for our Just Conversations. This event is to elevate critical issues of racial, social, and economic justice through the stories and the insights of brilliant Brooklyn changemakers and nonprofits. And tonight, we look forward to discussing the work of the New York State Community Commission on Reparations Remedies, which was established in late 2023. They have the rare opportunity to recognize the ills of the past and reckon with the longstanding consequences of racial discrimination and recommend steps to begin to repair and rebuild our society to be more fair and just for all. We know that systemic racism can only be undone through systemic change and intentional investment. Brooklyn is home to the largest population of people of African descent in North America. Nearly 730,000 residents, larger than Atlanta and Detroit. We are the center of Black history, Black culture, and Black leadership. Yet, we know our Black communities are systematically under-resourced In Brooklyn, the racial wealth gap between BIPOC and white Brooklynites is estimated at a whopping $40 to $50 billion. Let that sink in for a moment. At this event, we will gain insights into the historic, innovative intentions, the path toward reparations, and ask ourselves to consider how everyone in our communities will benefit when we all contend with the legacy of slavery. As we have seen in the long fight for civil justice, spearheaded by Black Americans since the beginning, a rising tide lifts all boats. Thank you for being here today, all of you, to learn alongside all of us. At Brooklyn.org, we have a front row seat to the challenges facing our communities, as well as the brilliance born from our borough. And I can tell you that Brooklyn is not only the cultural capital of New York City, it is also the center of innovation and the home to nonprofit changemakers. And that is why Brooklyn.org exists. We are partners and a platform for mobilizing change, bringing together everyone who loves Brooklyn, and to harness our collective generosity and creativity. This is all to make Brooklyn a beacon for what is possible. So tonight, this isn't just conversation. This is a conversation about justice, about the future we all want to build together. And we hope you will join our Brooklyn.org movement to achieve it. If you haven't already, head to our new home at brooklyn.org to sign up to be part of future events and to learn more about all the amazing nonprofits we back and the issues we're addressing, and also how you can play a part. I'll also ask you, if you have your iPhones, go to IG and follow us. You'll hear about so many amazing events that we're doing to support Brooklyn and support the nonprofits in our communities. Thank you for coming tonight, and I am now pleased to introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation, Aria Florent. Aria is the co-founder and CEO of Liberation Ventures, a field catalyst and intermediary building the power to win federal comprehensive reparations for Black Americas. Prior to Liberation Ventures, Aria has been a strategist, researcher, management consultant, organizer, teacher, and a nonprofit practitioner. She is committed to taking courageous, honest action on racial repair in America, and all of her work drives towards a singular mission: building a world where all people, whole selves, belong. Please join me and welcome Aria to the stage to introduce our panel.
Hi, everyone. We're all coming up here. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to start with introducing my panelists, and then we're going to generally flow this conversation as a little bit of sort of where have we been, where are we now, and where are we going? And I'm going to give y'all a little bit of orientation to the broader movement. Then we're going to get into the conversation, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. But you all should feel free to please write down questions that you think of as we go. They're going to bring them up, and I'll just try to integrate them as much as I can. So we have Dr. Derek Hamilton, who is the founding director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School, where he's the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy. Considered one of the nation's foremost public intellectuals, his work involves understanding and examining the causes and consequences of racial and ethnic disparities and the associated remedies to address those inequalities. He's been involved in crafting policy proposals at the federal, state, and local levels, including baby bonds, guaranteed income, and a federal job guarantee. and has testified before several Senate and House committees. He has a PhD from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a BA from Oberlin. Many of you have probably heard of baby bonds. Like, he's the baby bonds guy. Yeah. Yes. Seriously. We also have Assemblywoman Michaela Solage. Great. Who is a lifelong resident of Elmont and represents the 22nd Assembly District in Nassau County. She was first elected in 2012 and is the first person of Haitian descent to be elected to the New York State Legislature. She currently serves as the Assembly Deputy Majority Leader, as well as Chair of the New York State Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. In the Assembly, she was the primary sponsor of the bill to establish the New York State Community Commission on Reparations. So we thank you. Awesome. All right, so some of you probably came here because you know a little bit about reparations. Some of you probably were brought here by someone who came here who knows a bit about reparations. So we're going to do a little bit of myth busting about reparations just to start so that we're all on the same page. So a lot of people think that reparations is just about the money or even just about cash. But actually, reparations is much more expansive and comprehensive than that. It is financial and non-financial, and it is truly kind of at its heart the process of the state making amends for harm. So it can be material, it can be systemic, it can be symbolic repair, it can be for victims, for their families, and for broader society. And there are many, many frameworks out there that kind of articulate what reparations can look like, the UN being probably the most prominent. We at Liberation Ventures apply the UN framework specifically to chattel slavery and its legacy, and we have a repair framework that includes 4 things: reckoning, acknowledgement, accountability, and redress. So when people ask us, what are reparations? That's how we answer those 4 things in an iterative cycle. The movement itself gained a lot of prominence back in 2014 when Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote The Case for Reparations article. But the reality is that this movement is actually older than emancipation. Black people have been fighting for what is owed to them since really before the Civil War. And there have been so many people, historians, economists, lawyers, everyday Black people fighting for this who have really sort of held the torch for a very long time. And I name that just because I think it's really important for a movement that has been sort of perpetually unseen, that has gotten some more attention in the last decade, for us to actually really acknowledge all of the people who continue to keep that fire burning and get us to where we are today. And a lot of the kind of energy around the movement, especially over the last few decades, has swirled around H.R. 40, which is a federal bill in the House to study the impact of slavery and its legacies and recommend reparations proposals. Now, that bill was first introduced in 1989. It languished and continues to languish. The first time it ever passed out of committee was in 2021. And I name that because it was actually introduced 1 year after the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which was when we paid reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. And I just want to read a quote, actually, from Ronald Reagan, who signed that law. He said, "The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 surviving Japanese Americans of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law. I love that quote for a few reasons. One being the way we think about the purpose of repair and reparations at Liberation Ventures is that this is all in service of building an actual, just, truly thriving multiracial democracy. That actually you can't live in a society with real heterogeneity and difference without a culture of repair, because difference actually often causes conflict and harm, and we have to be able to repair it in an ongoing way. So while our North Star is federal policy change, we often think about how important culture change is to making that policy change possible and durable. The second thing, is that he acknowledges in that quote the role that reparations plays in upholding democratic norms. And I think we're going to get into this, but something that's so relevant to our present moment. He reminds us that reparation has a precedent in the US. It's actually not a Black-specific word. It is a word that has been applied to repairing the harm that has been enacted on so many communities, not only in the US, but around the world. And, those who would say that the word is kind of a divisive or toxic word, really, it's only seen that way by some when it's applied to Black people. And so I name that because I just think it's so important for the normalization of the word as it applies to Black people in the US. And then I think, this is a dream, I'm gonna dream, but it also reminds us that Ronald Reagan was for reparations. That it's actually possible for this to not be an incredibly partisan issue.
That irony should not be lost.
Right. So, okay, current state of the movement, really quickly, there are dozens of organizations across the country doing really amazing work, building momentum in the reparations movement. There are organizers, researchers, journalists, artists, public officials, the list goes on. And we need so many different kinds of people and experiences and expertise in this movement to be successful. We are seeing wins in cities and states. So even though the federal landscape looks barren at the moment, and is, Evanston passed reparations a few years ago. California was the first state to stand up a task force. They submitted a full suite of recommendations, and there are a ton of activists on the ground who are working to pass those policies. We saw Palm Springs, descendants of the Section 14 survivors, get a settlement just in sort of the late last 2024. So our work remains even despite the current climate in DC. We know there's a lot of work to do outside of the federal level, at the city and state level, but also outside of even the policy and advocacy arenas. There are really important things to do around narrative and culture change on this issue as well. So I almost want to make you guys actually guess. Liberation Ventures just did a poll, and we evaluated the public support in New York for reparations. So how many people think that, I'm gonna do quarters. So how many people think 100? We're gonna do 100, 75, 50, 25. How many people think 100% support? Okay, great. How many people think 75% support? Okay, 50? Okay, maybe like a third, and then 25? Another third? 0? You're right, okay. So, okay, you guys are not too far off. So 48% of New Yorkers express support for comprehensive reparations. And the important thing is that actually more people support than oppose. So 20% are neutral, and just 32% express some degree of opposition. So That's pretty good, actually. Compared to the national level, the figure is about 36% of people support reparations, which is still actually higher than most people think. I'll name that also, New Yorkers express support for candidates who support reparations. 70% of New Yorkers report that a political candidate's support for reparations would increase their support for that candidate or have no impact on that support. So that's really telling as well. And then I'll name that 61% of New Yorkers are willing to take action in support of reparations. So these are really good numbers, and they bode well for the commission. So let's get started. Okay, I want to start with just how we got here. Will you start us off and tell us what was the catalyst for the commission?
And I always joke around. I know you've all heard of this gentleman named Charles Barron. He's a rebel rouser, as you know, in New York City politics. And, as a junior member, I was sitting next to him, talking to him about, his different bills and priority. And we were going through the bills, and he was saying, oh, we have a bill on reparations. And I'm like, reparations? And I'm like, explain to me, what is this bill? And we were talking about the bill and that it comprises of a commission. And so we started doing research, and then we saw that in California, they were able to pass this commission. And so I always tell people the inception of reparations didn't begin with us. It was an idea that's been floating around. And sometimes it just takes a spark or a conversation for energy to begin and begin pushing towards it. And so amongst that conversation, we collectively started going to the different colleagues that we have all around the state. And to tell you, we have a lot of Black members in the state legislature, from Buffalo all the way down to Long Island. And we have significant power within the state legislature, both within the Assembly and Senate. So we started having a dialogue amongst each other saying, hey, look, we know that there are many social ills that have happened to us, whether it's the vestiges of slavery, like mass incarceration, the lack of, affordable housing discrimination, the lack of education. And we said, look, we could spend generations trying to tackle all these issues, and that's going to be hard for us to do. But why not push this concept within the legislature of reparations and begin with a commission which will kind of draft a report so that we can look at this not as political beings, but as individuals on a commission who have academic backing. And so we started having the conversations. Charles passed the bill in the Assembly, and it was a great feeling amongst Assembly members to pass the bill. But people still didn't believe of the concept. They laughed at it. They said, oh, reparations, that's a joke. That's a pie in the sky. We can never do that in New York. And so Charles left for the city council, and I told him I want the bill. I said I wanted to take over the bill and make this a real concept, because it's not about what people think of reparations. It's actually what it actually means for our communities. And so in that process, we began really educating the community that reparations is not only just a fiscal aspect, but about destroying and making the construct of economic enslavement, physical enslavement, mental enslavement, taking that and tearing it down. And so it took a lot of education, a lot of conversation, and I know that we have further questions, but it was really, the idea just was something that came out of the members of the legislature saying that we need to make a stance on this reparations issue, that it's not just a foreign concept or an international concept, but that we can do it on a state level and have conversations and let it be different from California. Because we know that the Reparations Commission passed in California, but in New York, our history of enslavement and of the vestiges of slavery go far deeper, and they exist in every single system, and we perpetuate it. So we decided that we needed this commission to get done.
I love it. So this question is for both of you. What is the scope of it? What's the charge of the commission?
So I'll start with some gratitude. Gratitude to the host for having us here and allowing this type of conversation. And that's not a small deal, particularly in this climate. Gratitude to my co-panelists for all the work, for providing the facilitation that we can actually have a commission. And Aria, and what's going on with Liberation Ventures is incredible, the work that's being done with polls. And then really quick, from my institute, there's Sarita Eaton, who's here, and Afranima Bew. Sarita is the director of the executive office, and Afranima is a fellow at the institute. And then with that introduction, I got to give a slight caveat, which is, as a commissioner, we've agreed not to speak for the commission as individuals. We're trying to hold up that solidarity when we're out in public. But that said, I feel like I got a lot to say for this conversation as a scholar who is interested in translating his work not just from knowledge creation, but really paradigm change so that we can actually have justice. So I can say that, broadly speaking, the scope of commissions like the one that we have in New York is to really do multiple things. One, uncover the history, some truth and reconciliation. Along with some analytical framing about the feasibility of redressing that truth and reconciliation in that history. So there'll be a policy aspect, there'll be economic aspects, but also an uncovering and a highlighting of a sordid past for which reparations intended to redress.
And we wanted to ensure as legislators that they provide us with a document. So we passed a bill making a commission of 9 members, 3 from the Senate, 3 from the Assembly, and 3 from the governor. It was even. In New York State, usually commissions have, like the governor has all the power, but we wanted it to be fair. And the commission is independent, and so they have to hire their own staff, which is a challenge in New York State government. They do their own planning because we really wanted an independent report. So at the end of the process of the commission, they're going to come out with a report with what they believe is actual tangible things that we can move towards reparations in New York State. And once they come out with that report, it's delivered to the legislature and the governor. And then our process is that we turn it back into a political process and we get reparations in New York State.
Thank you both so much. I love it. So there is a conversation within the reparations movement about what should be happening at the city and state level and what should be happening at the federal level. Can you talk a little bit about what the sort of opportunities are to do this state level work? Why does the state level work matter in the context of the broader movement building and the federal?
Yeah. Right, so 2 components of reparations is the history, the truth and reconciliation, and the redress. So I bring this up in that this is a movement. So the redress, as was pointed out, is critical, but so is the truth and reconciliation. So the federal government is the entity of government with the capacity and, frankly, the breadth and the culpability to ultimately fulfill reparations and move us to a new history after a new pathway after we've redressed our sordid history. But that said, it doesn't make sense to wait. That said, it also makes sense that to get to the federal government, like any other policy, it often starts local and builds up.
And, you know, being a New York State legislator, the federal government has some limited authority, and then the state has a lot more power. So we help facilitate education. We're the ones that have purview over, like, for instance, state correctional facilities. We have purview over, education. Local government has purview over education, healthcare, which we know that, Black folks, when it comes to healthcare disparities, are at the butt end of racial disparities. So, the state has a lot of power, and we are the boiler room of democracy. And so it's important that we address the wrongs on the state level and also dictate to the lower levels of government, that they also need to change. So it's always said that the city is a slave of the state. And so when the state says to do something, the city has to follow. And I talk about cities, counties, villages, And so it's important that we not only tackle, HR 40 and get that done on a federal level, but also look at how we can change the dynamic in the states, and then that will dictate what's going on in the city. And so it's a cascade. It's like dominoes. We have to impact all facets of government and change it so that we can make it fairer and more just for all. And really, the states are so important. I tell people, especially in this time right now, where we're being tormented by the federal government, the states are really the point where we could stop a lot of the injustices from trickling down. And so, for me, reparations was important on a state level because we can break a lot of these systems and make it fairer and more equitable by changing the dynamic, especially here in New York State.
Yeah, and New York is special. New York is special for a variety of reasons, including capacity. New York does have greater capacity than many other states, and loving the results from that poll, perhaps the will. Perhaps if you're going to start a movement, you have it at a place. And then if we think about comparability, modern forms of finance were modeled off of slavery. There's a great book by a historian at Cornell, Baptiste, called "The Truth, the Half Has Not Been Told," which really makes the case that our modern form of finance stemmed from literally slaves as providing the financial capital by which a lot of financial models today are resulting from.
And, on the poll, I want to just respond. I think most people are not educated on the different facets of reparations. A little tidbit, my husband is like a Republican. He's like a MAGA Republican. I don't know how we stay married. And, at first when I was talking to him about the concept of reparations, he was telling me, no, bad, this is, why I paid for this. I never had slaves, all the excuses that people say. But when I explained to him that it's about healing and repair, and about making sure that we take the systems of wrongs that are embedded in our society and fix them for all, he started to cool to the idea. He started to be interested, like, oh, okay, we want to make education better for all students. Who would say no to that? We want to make sure that healthcare is accessible, and that regardless of your zip code, you can have the same quality of life. I come from Long Island, which, if was the first suburb. And in the suburb, in the deeds of the houses that were given to many of the veterans that came back from World War II, it specifically said, you cannot sell to black families. And I tell him I told my husband this and others who refute reparations, that, this happened in recent history. That's a generation ago. This is not about chattel slavery. This is about the systems of hate that exist, that rob people from generational wealth. And so when I hear a poll like that, I said, it's about educating folks about what we can do to make this world a better place for all. And once you uplift, the black community or one segment of the community, you uplift them all.
You all are hitting on so many incredibly important points. One of you said the word cascade, right? When you look at other at-scale political and culture change movements in this country, you actually see that the pattern across all of the ones that have been successful is that they went state by state. Actually, you look at marriage equality, you look at the Affordable Care Act, you look at marijuana, even abortion. When we lost last year, 2 years ago, we went back to the states, right? And so I think there's so much there in terms of sort of fortifying what we need to do at the state level. And then I think your point about the polling and the narrative change, like that's why we actually have so much work to do to tell a new story to the country about what reparations are and who they're for, why they matter, why and how they're related to democracy. I think that I want to parlay that question about the narrative into our current narrative environment, right? Where we know we are in a deep moment of backlash. And, some people might say, okay, well, if we can't even do DEI, how could we ever do reparations? And obviously what is coming from the federal government is hard to stomach in some ways. So how do you all understand, what do you think about the opportunities at the state level, specifically in this moment? Like how do you respond to someone who says that? And what do you think is most important for us to learn by doing this at the state level in order to inform the federal?
So, the part about what's going on at the federal government, one thing is we need to commit because it's the right thing to do. So irrespective of time, irrespective of contemporary conditions, you commit to justice. You commit to justice and do it, and the overturn will occur in ways that you can and cannot predict. So right now, if we even want to characterize what's going on in Washington, where we see some things that are unprecedented, we like to frame it as it's a bipartisan that presents a strong man who's able to exploit our differences for political allegiances by offering some individuals relative status, by offering them, for their political allegiance, some status better than some other. Well, what makes that potent? Insecurity. What makes that potent? Vulnerability. So that's a context by which we get something that is very radical right now, but on the other side, it also is indicative of opportunities for something dramatically different as well. So this is the time to build power. This is the time to commit so that we are ready, so that we can chart a different course. But again, I like to emphasize it is a bipartisan economy, both Democrats and Republicans, that's led to the conditions for somebody to exploit our difference.
And we need to call out their hypocrisy, because the other day they were like, oh, reparations for the J6. But, reparations good for them, but not for us. Like, as we said before, this is a time to build political power. It's a time to see who your friends are and to call out those who are not our friends. And, they've been trying to do this for a long time, whether it was woke, they called it woke culture, they called it, what's it called? CRT, now it's DEI. Like, these guys, whatever we want to call it, they're always gonna attack us because they want a segment of our society to remain low, and they want to keep people at a disadvantage. And so it's important that we use this time and space to educate our friends about what's going on, empower them, because right now some people feel a bit sad and upset about what's going on, but empower them to do more. Say, hey, don't be upset, don't be angry. It's nice to do a TikTok, but why don't you come out and come to meetings with me, come to forums such as this so we can meet like-minded people. Let's start building power. Let's start running electoral candidates that believe in our issues. Let's start, holding our leaders accountable. There's so much that we can do in this time and space. It's only 4 years, I tell people. It's gonna be a tough 4 years, but let's be smart about how we use this time, because last time Trump was in, we were able to build electoral power and push a lot of initiatives that we were not able to do for generations. For example, in the state legislature in 2020, after the George Floyd murder, we were able to change a lot of the laws to make it fairer and to prevent police brutality here in New York State. And so we just got to think about what we want to do and get it done.
And quickly to build upon that so that it's not all doom and gloom, during the pandemic, we had moratoriums on foreclosures, moratoriums on evictions. The federal government sent direct checks to the American people by way of the IRS. And guess what? It was the shortest recession on record. Of course, inflation took the headlines, and we can talk about some of the price gouging that took place because of the conditions from the pandemic. But if you don't want all doom and gloom, we have small memories, but the reality is that with all the pain from the pandemic, we did a lot of unprecedented things, and they worked.
Mm-hmm. You're both in different ways speaking to this concept of, sometimes it's actually easiest to build the transformative thing when stuff is really broken, right? When we all see how broken it is, whether through COVID or whether through Trump or whether through something else. And I think, it is. I mean, we are already seeing the harm that this administration is causing. And we know, because history tells us, that this will change. The pendulum will swing back. We will get another window of opportunity, and we actually have to be ready to step through that to usher in an actual reparative era after this harmful one. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start integrating some audience questions, and we will get to kind of the future too, like what can people do. So, but specific questions. So, as truth and history is getting erased, are there concerns about being able to preserve documentation or archives to facilitate reparations efforts?
You're academic. I don't know.
I mean, certainly big concerns, but here's an opportunity for technology to step in. I mean, literally, you have documents being eaten by insects. So this preservation of information is critical and important. And good news is there's technology now that can digitize this information to make sure we have it in perpetuity.
And we also have to continue kind of telling the stories and making sure that we are reciting our living history to folks. So, you know, reparations is gaining traction, and we need to make sure that we're educating folks on why this concept is so important. And so using technology, using social circles such as this is really important.
And the stakes are clearly high. So when we see the attacks on things like DEI and trying to censor what jargon we can use to describe things, well, there are things at stake. If we try to address any contemporary phenomena in an ahistoric manner, we will be lost. We will not understand how we got here. The solutions and the approaches will be problematic. We resort to trying to explain inequality as something is wrong with people, that there's some deficit amongst people. Without this rich history, without this understanding of the intergenerational deprivation, we'll be deterred from the accurate solutions, which is invest in people, making sure people are not resource deprived.
How long, so what's the tenure of the commission?
I'll explain that. So when we wrote the piece of legislation, we want to make sure the commission not only convened, but had the opportunity to give the report as soon as possible, because we can't wait to fix all these social ills. So in the legislation, when we drafted, we said that the commission had to meet within 6 months of the bill being signed, and then they had 18 months to complete the work. And we only put that timeline because we wanted to get it done. A lot of commissions happen, and sometimes the report never comes out. It's happened so frequently. And so we specifically put it in a timeline. But we realized as time went on, as the commission goes on, we're going to need a bit more time because, first of all, there's a lot that we have to consider when we're talking about reparations. And also, the nuts and bolts of government is hard to navigate. It takes time to hire staff. It takes time to plan meetings. We also want to hear from New Yorkers all across the state, so that in itself is time consuming. And so the commission has requested additional time to do the report, so we're currently right now negotiating what that time is. And so we're open to giving the commission more time. And so I guess if you want to speak on that, I took all the L's for you. So no, yeah,
I'll take the privilege because I can say whatever I want.
Exactly.
We hope the commission will get some more time. And I think this is really important, though, because the work of the commission is the excavation work, really understanding the depth of the harm. And that is, therefore, what the policy has to be based on, right? And that's how you design policy that can withstand legal scrutiny. And so I think I just name that because, especially in this moment, that we need the commissioners to be able to do really great work.
And we know that the commission is going to get sued. Like we are cognizant of that, and we are ready to defend the commission and the report. And it's crazy that people are going to sue about a report, but
I will not speak on getting sued. Sorry.
Great.
don't speak on it.
But thanks to whoever asked that question, because you can tell us it's a good one. What are ways to measure progress on culture change, especially given the opinions in the polls can sometimes be fleeting or shallow, and they can change?
Yeah. And we should, a good way to think of polls is a snapshot, right? And I'm glad you're saying that, right? The idea is, the poll in and of itself doesn't deter or It's information, it's a snapshot, but ultimately, to get towards vision, we need that. We need a commitment and an approach. So I think we look at polls over time and see what's working and what's not as we educate and provide additional information.
Exactly. And I will just add that one of the pieces of work that Liberation Ventures is doing as part of our narrative change work is some really deep qualitative and quantitative audience research, trying to really understand how different audiences resonate or not with various different narratives on the topic of reparations, and really trying to figure out sort of where are people along a journey to believing in and supporting reparations, and based on where they are on that journey, what messages, what narratives are going to be most resonant for them with regard to moving them to the next step. And so then, like Derek said, you can design campaigns, you can design social media, you can do art, like there are so many ways to try to change narrative and culture, and then continue to take snapshots with polling to understand how you're making progress. Awesome. Okay, I want to dive into what's coming next and what people can do. So, as you said, the commission's in process. It is going to finish up its work at some point in the next year-ish. What else is needed, right? So the commission's doing its thing. It's doing its thing sort of in secrecy, although all of the hearings are public, so you guys should watch them. What else is needed sort of around the commission to make sure that it's successful? And so that its recommendations don't just become a binder on a shelf.
Yeah. I encourage people to participate because they do have a portion of the commission hearings that you can testify about your experience around reparations. So if you want reparations to be about a check, you can say that. If you want reparations about social change, you could say that. I encourage you to participate, and you could also submit comment to the commission as well. And then outside,
Can I jump in on there? There's a question about who the commission's talking to as they do the report. So are there ways to participate literally by sharing stories that get informed?
yes, you can testify in front of the commission. And then also within the legislation, we said that the commission has to work with historically Black institutions in New York State in order to come up with historical findings. And so they can work with any institute or any organization by their approval to do the work that they need to do.
Yeah. And there's a website that will list upcoming hearings and places by which you can partake and participate. But we are traversing the state in part to try to allow for these forums for input.
And the website, have you gotten like a web page yet?
There is a webpage. I don't know it off the top of my head.
You
I
could
should,
search
but-
online New York State reparations, because I know that's another thing. To build a website takes time, so it's a whole thing. I didn't realize how much
have one up.
building you have to do in order to really stand up a commission. We were so we're so excited. That's why. But we encourage folk to just get involved in the commission's work and have conversation with them, and also educate each other, because there's going to be a point in time where the commission's work is done, and we're going to have to now push the findings and get that done. So you saw in California, they issued a report. There were several recommendations, and even after thoughtful analysis and engagement, many of the recommendations didn't happen because there wasn't the political will.
Right.
And so it requires us to start building coalitions, being laser focused about what we're looking for, and then participating in great organizations that exist, like the December 12th Movement, Liberation Ventures, Get Freed Movement, joining them and pushing what you're interested in. And I tell you, people, there's so many different facets of reparations, so many different facets of harms that exist in our society. You can get involved. You'll find something that you are particularly passionate about, and you can get involved in changing that dynamic here in New York State.
That's great. So I want to just underline what you named a bunch of orgs that are amazing, and I want to make sure they get their shine. So you can get involved in the commission in sort of the very direct ways that the commission needs feedback from New Yorkers. And you can get involved in the coalitions of grassroots organizations who are coming together to basically flank the coalition, right? To do the kind of organizing work, advocacy work, communications work that really is needed to educate New Yorkers. You know, another stat that I didn't share is like 60% of New Yorkers have no idea that the commission is happening, right? So, and that's not the work of the commissioners to make it known. That's the work of organizers on the ground, right? Because the more that people hear from their people, the more they're going to resonate and want to get involved. So so you named December 12th movement, Get Free, who's the other one you named?
Yes, Get Free Movement. There's also the coalition of
Exactly.
New Yorkers for Reparations.
NY number 4 reparations.org, and you can join the coalition.
Yes, there's opportunity for everyone within the coalition to participate, and we're going to need a lot of support because, you know, as you saw in California, it became really messy as they were trying to pass the bills around reparations, and a lot of it couldn't get done. Simple things like, you know, restitution for land taken for not equal payment, and that was hard to get, you know. There's a lot in the reparation space, and it's important that we just stay united and not only united, but focused on getting the harms redressed.
I just want to add that if you are a funder in the room, that work needs to be funded too. No, seriously. I mean, we think about government just sort of operating in its silo, but there is so much work to do to build the political will that is going to be necessary in order to make sure that the recommendations don't sit on a shelf. So if you need information about who to fund, just let us know. Dive in there.
And just to extract a little bit, paradigm change is the word I used. Again, we can go back to the Assemblywoman named some bills that came out of New York. And it was largely because of movements and agitations. They were unprecedented moves, and it was people demanding something different. So we need something different. We need all hands on deck. We need funders, and we need everybody first understanding that you actually get to define value. So if the value of justice, inclusion, of fairness, of not extracting and exploiting from people is part of your value system, you actually get to define that, and that can become part of our economic vision. We get to choose. It's not presented to us as if we do. We are presented with an economy that's grounded in some technical framing of self-interested behavior without constraint as the end all for how we define what is good, what is merited, and what we want to live in. We get to choose different. So I would say that one, you need a paradigm shift with the values of defining what is a good economy. And I would say people being able to be self-determining. That's a notion of freedom, of justice, and resources has to be a component of that. The ability to vote is valuable and useful, and we should be civically engaged. But if you are hungry, if you're without health care, if you are uneducated, if you are homeless, you don't have agency. You don't have the capacity to be self-determining. Well, we as a society get to choose different. And I'll just put a button on it real quick and say the reparative justice is a critical component. It's a necessary component, but it won't be sufficient. Don't let us try to tell you that reparations is going to solve all of our problems. Paradigm shift will, but reparations, that understanding of how we got here is critical if we're going to go forward with something different. And the redress is also necessary because without it, it's empty. So we need those things.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
That came from the audience. Do you see a potential conjoining of your baby bond work and the Commission on Reparations work?
So there's good public policy and there's reparations. Baby bonds is a complement, not a substitute for reparations. Baby bonds helps to redress the racial wealth gap. Why? And by the way, it's not exclusive for Black people, but it's progressively seeded so that every child born gets an endowment so that when they become a young adult, they can get into home ownership, They can get into a managerial professional occupation without debt, or they can have some capital to start a business. So it's like Social Security, but for young adults. It's just a nest egg. So it has the capacity to redress this intergenerational link to our past, where essentially black people are a population without capital for all the reasons that reparations is going to redress. And it also has the capability of, I promise you I'm going to be quick. It also has the capability, we know how capital works. Capital consolidates, it isolates, and it excludes, and it grows. So we know that capital can grow, and that's a good thing, but we have to democratize it. So baby bonds is a policy that makes sure that everybody has the benefit of having access to capital. It's not sufficient to do everything that reparations does. Reparations is retrospective, so you keep hearing the word truth and reconciliation, but it's so critical. That truth and reconciliation is so critical, not just for black people, but for all of us. How do we treat poor people in this country? We isolate them, we incarcerate them, we control their fertility, we conscript them to our military, we stigmatize them, whether they're black or white. And why do we get there? Because somehow we think that they're a deficit. Somehow they're responsible for their condition in life. They didn't do something right. Well, that truth and reconciliation of reparations, where we have an honest, sobering conversation, if you're going to protect property rights with no discussion of the immoral activities by which that property came to be distributed in the first place, that's not justice. So reparations has that truth and reconciliation that offers dignity, that changes our understandings and narratives about inequality, that in a prospective way will lead to a better society.
I love what you're saying, because I actually think one way to think about what you're talking about in this paradigm shift is true culture change. Like the norms of our society being ones in which everyone has the skill and the will to repair harm anytime it's caused. So not just with regard to black people, but anytime it's caused. And what would society look like if that were the case? If we actually knew how to do that and we were motivated to do that as individuals, but then also as institutions and as systems.
And black people in this country have been demarked and serve as the anchor of some sort of deficit, which frankly stems and stigmatizes other populations as well.
Amazing. Okay. If you believe you have an ancestor who may have owned slaves, what is the best way to engage on this issue and support the reparations movement?
Participate in the hearings. When we were discussing the legislation, many of us wanted to define who would get access to the reparations, whether it's financial or system change. And we did not, as political beings, as governmental officials, want to define that because, for number one, government is part of the problem, so why are we trying to solve the problem? And second, we wanted outside entities to dictate to us what would be the proper way to fix these harms. And so we left it up to the commission. And so if you feel, like I said before, if you feel that there's an aspect of reparations that you want to see within the report, participate, build a campaign, a coalition, and try to influence the commission.
Yeah, and my quick answer is that's a personal choice. At the end of the day, the demands are going to be on the state, and individuals need to look at their conscience and look at whatever motivates them, and those are personal choices that commit to justice would just be my advice.
I just have to emphasize, education of the community of New Yorkers on reparation is really essential for us to be able to get the benefits of reparation. So, engaging the commission, engaging your neighbors, and, building a coalition and being a part of the coalition, it's going to be so important to make sure that we fix the harms that have happened to the Black community.
It's a really courageous question that this person asked, because I'll just add that there are many people who are really wrestling with what really is the shame of feeling like their ancestors were enslavers, of knowing that their ancestors were enslavers. And there are communities of people who have come together, some with wealth, some not, who are basically in various processes of repair. So if you are that person and you want to get connected to other people, feel free to reach out to us. All right. Actually, I'm going to stay on the topic of white people. How should the messaging of reparations be presented to white Americans that live in and come from a legacy of deep poverty, for example, Appalachia?
Yeah, kind of some of the things I've been describing, that for justice to occur, it requires not just policies, but to use the words of Aria, culture. And if we're ever going to get our culture right, we have to put a lens with integrity as to how we got here in the first place. And that is a major component of reparations.
As I said before, my husband is a MAGA Republican. He's also white. And we've had this conversations internally in our own family. And it's really just talking about the American dream. We all believe in America. We love the United States. And it's all about opportunity and justice for all. We say it in the pledge. And so how can we live up to those words? It's by making sure that everyone has opportunity for justice and freedom for all and fixing the systems that exist. So it's about really, I think, level setting to folks who don't believe in reparations, having honest conversations with them and engaging them on the topic, saying to them that, we can have it all. It's not about taking from you. It's about us giving to each other and working together for the betterment of our country. And this is about making America stronger and having those conversations around it. So, I don't want to say make America great again, but
We got to find when it was.
But it's really having the conversation about that this is a wrong that exists and that we've never atoned to that, and making this country a better place by having those conversations. And it's going to be tough, but it's those one-on-one conversations that make it important.
Yeah. And really quick on this topic also, we've talked a lot about the cultural benefits, and not only the cultural benefits, the public policy benefits going forward on how we do public policy that will affect us all. But here's another reality. Reparations is stimulus. Reparations would stimulate an economy. There's risk of inflation, but if it's directed towards productive use, and I dare say there's a productive use directing reparations towards Black people, but it also will have a growth igniting stimulus effect, and it leads to another caveat that we need to understand. Cash reparations is great because it's without conditions, it's without stigma. It says, in a non-paternalistic way, this harm was done to you, here's some cash redress. But what we also need to be cognizant of is that Black people do not own the means of production in the United States, do not own capital in the United States en masse. So as a result, any form of redress should include some new capital access to Black people who otherwise wouldn't have it, so that when that stimulus comes into effect, they also benefit from it.
Yeah, we think a lot about that, what would be encompassed in a portfolio of redress policies, and specifically with the goal of not only closing the wealth gap, but actually keeping it closed. And that's a different question, or an additional question. All right. Will the New York State Reparations Commission offer updated informative meetings via Zoom? And are these meetings open to the public?
As was pointed out, there was some capacities in getting up to speed. Please don't quote me, but I believe that there's the Zoom option now for all our meetings, but I'm not positive.
And I want to say I appreciate the commission because, from the first meeting to the last meeting, they have taken recommendations and changed the way that they operated by the suggestions that you made as New Yorkers. So, I just appreciate the commission. I want to thank you in public for what you do, because number one, you have courage, because I've seen people, like the first meeting, people came and yelled at them, very first meeting. But they took those suggestions and they made it action. So it's really exciting to see that this is a process of reciprocation, that actually things are happening and people are moving to conversations.
And I'm getting the love on stage, but it's really the executive committee and our executive director that's doing a lot of that work.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, last question from the cards. Has New York State ever issued a meaningful public acknowledgement and apology for slavery?
According to our records, they haven't did a formal proclamation apologizing or atoning for chattel slavery. It's been mentioned by certain leaders, executives, but nothing ceremonial and formal.
Yeah, I don't.
I will say that is one of the things that was successful that came out of the California process. That was one of the bills that passed, and Gavin Newsom signed a really meaningful apology in the last session. All right, any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Obviously, I think, well, maybe not obviously, I think this is all great and wonderful and to serve a long time coming, but I'd love to know more about, aside from cash, which I think people, that's what they automatically go to. Sorry, can people hear me? Okay. Just more specifics about policy or, land back, or the specific things that you want to see in when you do talk about on a broader level, right? Like the paradigm shift. What is materially, and of course, yes, socially, but what does that mean? Like, what are some of the ththings that you're asking for?
Do you feel like you can dream?
I mean, I won't speak for the commission. I'm not speaking for the commission, but you named some. Some you can have land transfer, and that's certainly not unprecedented in America nor New York. Frankly, you could literally have stock buybacks and redistributions if that's another means by which you want to distribute. So as you can hear that I'm alluding to, the forms of redress should include some asset transfers as well. But the cash itself is not something to poo-poo because of that non-paternalistic aspect. I'll say you all probably seen the joke when Dave Chappelle talked about black people had reparations, they go out and buy Cadillac. Well, my attempt at humor is the problem isn't that they're going to buy Cadillacs, is that they don't own stock in Cadillac. So we would hope that those type of forms, other questions about can we afford it? We certainly saw at the federal government that we can intervene in dramatic ways really quick with capacities to finance it. At the state and local levels, it's a little more difficult, but there are also creative solutions like using the tax code. So the tax code becomes something that's not a one-shot deal that offers some perpetuity by which you can transfer either cash or assets in a way to impact the redress. One other form. Another form is institutional support. So for example, historically during the New Deal, HBCs suffered a great deal from some of the housing discrimination that existed. So you had GI soldiers returning with limited capacities to use their bill because HBCUs couldn't expand to the extent that non-HBCUs could. As a result, we have a huge trajectory and difference in endowments. And to put that number in context, the GI Bill alone spent more on higher education in America than the Marshall Plan that essentially rebuilt Europe. So that's some context. So you could imagine support to black institutions that in a more communal asset is another form. But there's
veterans, they never got their GI Bill.
And you had veterans that literally were dishonorably discharged for only reason to allow them not to get the benefit. And then you had some that simply couldn't take it up because they were discriminated against. They couldn't use their bill at a non-HBCU because the university simply wouldn't accept them.
It's an amazing organization called Black Veterans Project working on that.
Yeah. And then, but let me give the one little concern about the potential when you do institutional reform, gentrification. So you would have to make sure that the entity that's receiving the transfer is somehow shielded from those that have greater power and capacity to come in and take advantage of it in ways that wasn't intended by the transfer.
We have
jump
time
in?
for one more question.
And I just want quickly.
I want to flesh out this answer a little more because it's important. So,
Just quickly, when we were discussing reparations as legislators, we had so many different ideas. For example, we have a broken MWBE system, which is a women and minority business enterprise system here in New York State, and we haven't gotten the political will to fix it. So maybe, with the recommendation, we can actually fix it to make it fairer for Black and brown businesses. Another issue that is all around is that there are many African burial grounds that exist that are not funded in a way where we can bring them up to proper acknowledgement of our ancestors. Like in Staten Island, there was an African and enslaved burial ground discovered under a shopping plaza. And so one idea is to buy the shopping plaza and return it back to a proper burial ground for folks to be able to mourn their ancestors. San Juan Hill, which was a historically Black and brown neighborhood in the 50s and 60s, was destroyed for Lincoln Center. Those people were not given proper money for removal, for moving expenses. And so those people, some of them are still alive today. And so giving them just compensation would be something that would be fair and timely. And lastly, there's places like Timbuktu in the Adirondacks, another historically Black farming community that existed that no one knows about. How about we buy the land and name it Timbuktu, and then encourage high school students to go up to the Adirondacks in a camp that's fully funded where they can learn about their history. So there's so many different initiatives that we can put forward. It just takes creativity, will, and for us to acknowledge that we need to make atonement. And so, we could sit here for hours thinking about the different ideas. I can go to you, give you mine. Yeah.
And I just want to give a little bit of structure around it. In the beginning when I said how we define reparations as those four parts: reckoning, acknowledgement, accountability, and redress. We envision a reparations portfolio as being a portfolio of policies that fall under those four buckets. So Derek named a ton of things that would fall under redress. You named a ton of things that may fall under accountability or redress as well. There are also things within the reckoning category, like what we're teaching people in our schools. Right now, books are being banned, right? Like, how are we actually building in the memory that we need in order to make sure that this doesn't keep happening? Same with acknowledgement. Like, we have, if y'all have been to Germany, you can't have statues of Nazis, right? You can't step foot in Berlin without seeing something that commemorates the Holocaust and reminds people. And we have nothing like that. I mean, we have EJI in Montgomery, right? Like, what would it be if actually everyone had to go there, right? Or everyone had to do a year of service in a community that wasn't theirs, right? So I think that's what we're talking about, is what are the policy changes and culture changes within reckoning, acknowledgement, accountability, and redress that we need to instill in people how to do this repair and actually also change the material conditions that they're in.
I mean, all those things help with the framing, which is this is not meant to be retribution. This is human rights. This is that frame. It's not revenge.
It's making everybody better. Okay, I know we're almost at time.
We are. I know you have to catch a plane, so I want to make sure that we get you to it. One last question.
Hi, this is a question for Dr. Hamilton about baby bonds legislation. It is a race-neutral policy. Therefore, how could it assist in closing the racial wealth gap and be an adjunct to reparations work?
So I like to frame it as affirmative inclusion, race conscious, or even anti-racist. And to answer the question, what are the aspects, even though it's not race exclusionary, that make it trend towards closing the racial wealth gap? If we go back to the New Deal policies, Social Security didn't say Black people couldn't acquire it, but when it was originally legislated, domestic and agricultural workers couldn't access it. Similar to Aria pointing out the GI Bill, it didn't say black GIs didn't have access to it, but in the administration of it, black people were denied access. So you can have race exclusion, racist policies administered that aren't race specific. So you can learn the lessons from that past and come up with various policies that are affirmatively inclusive in how you design, manage, and implement them. I think baby bonds is one of those type policies because it deals with the dimension of inequality for which black and white people in an economic sense are most disparate, and that is wealth. So there is work by Naomi Zudi that in a review of black political economy, where she actually does the simulations of what happens with a new generation that receives a baby bonds, how will it trend towards closing the racial wealth gap? So again, I'm being long-winded. I'm gonna try to be quicker and to the point. The accounts are seeded in a progressive way. So it's not like some universal account that everybody gets the same amount. If you're from the most wealth-poor family, you'll get seeded a bigger account. So there's a gradational seeding with the point of trying to recognize the ways in which wealth is generated. It is wealth that begets more wealth. So what this does is similar to Social Security, everybody doesn't get the same retirement. In a progressive way, it ensures that your birthright doesn't exclude you from access to wealth.
All right. Thank you so much, Brooklyn Org, for having us. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you for the candid conversation, truly. For our audience members, please, please, please go to NY4, number 4, reparations.org. You can click on the little thing in the corner, click join the commission, fill out a survey, and they will make sure that you are up to date on what's going on with the commission, how to go to the hearings and get involved. Join the commission. In addition, if you're interested in seeing any more of the public opinion polling, feel free to go to Liberation Ventures' website. That's just liberationventures.org. You can just write a comment in the contact form, and we'll follow up with you and we'll send you the data. So thank you all so much for coming.